All right, and here we are. Hello, everybody. I am assuming we are live. There's a little bit of a delay. There's a 20-second delay, Teresa. So I'm just going to wait a few seconds here for people to join us. Everybody, I am so thrilled to introduce to you today Miss Teresa Wagner. She specializes in animal communication, and she's going to teach us a little bit about this really incredible area that I know for myself I want to learn a lot more about. Welcome, Teresa. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Kenda. And I would just like to say to everybody as we begin, how much I appreciate not only you inviting me to come on, but how, as we started communicating the last couple of weeks preparing for this, just how impressed I am and grateful for your collegiality. A lot of people, in any field of work, even the healing arts, tend to be or can be competitive. And you are just so open to the thoughts and the expertise of others and incorporating it into what you're offering your clients. And I just really appreciate that. And for any of my clients who may be on this call, I just want to say too that, I have my own Facebook Pet Loss and Animal Communication page, but your Facebook page is really different. And I've been telling some of my clients about that because your page is much more of a live, immediate support group. Right on Facebook. And mine's a little different. Mine's more about here's some information, hopefully some inspiration and support, but it's not a support group per se. So I just invite everybody to go to your Facebook page. And what's the name of it again? I'm sorry.
Healing Solutions for Pet Loss. And I welcome your honesty about that, Teresa, because it's interesting because I have contacted some people and said, hey, I'd love to interview and have, the group find out a little bit more about you. And not everybody's open to that. So it's nice when you can find two people who are open-minded about sharing information, because the goal is to help people heal and find peace and love again, as we have, right?
Yeah.
I think
we're here to help them, help people in the pain of losing an animal. No matter how good or skilled or expert we might be in our particular methods, the goal is not to tell somebody you have to use what I do. The goal is to make sure they get the help they need. And I hope as we get to know each other over time, I learn more about your hypnosis work, because I know nothing about it.
I'd love to share it.
So I just really appreciate it.
Absolutely. This is amazing. Where in the world are you, Teresa? Where?
Carmel, California.
So it's hot. The
central coast of California. Beautiful. And about 2.5 hours south of San Francisco.
Oh, fantastic. I'm curious. Quickly, you don't have to, how did you get into all this? I'm just curious how you became an animal communicator. Is that something you're born with? Can anybody do this?
Well, that's a really good question. And it's different for everybody. There are now probably, when I first started this work professionally, there were maybe like 50 people who were doing the work that we were aware of anyway. Now there are hundreds and hundreds of people around the world doing this. And everybody comes into the field from a different doorway, from a different background, which is great because it keeps it very diverse. For me, I talked to animals my whole life. When I was a little girl, I had a cat and I talked to her, and I talked to little animals in the garden. And it was just something that I remembered. And my belief is that most children do remember it. But we live in a culture that doesn't quite yet endorse or encourage that kind of communication. So I think a lot of children have it sort of squashed out of them. In fact, that almost happened to me, because when I was about 5 or 6, and before this incident I'm going to tell you about, my parents would always think it was cute when I would tell them what the cat was saying, or I think clearly they thought I was making it up. But one day we were at this beautiful park in Pennsylvania where I grew up. And there was a lake there, and there were all these ducks and swans, which I used to love to go see. And of course, we did the thing that we now know is horrible, and that's we bring white bread and feed them.
Oh, yeah.
Bread to wildlife, not even to humans. But anyway, the ducks would come right to the edge of this huge lake or pond, I forget, because they knew people would feed them. And this one duck, I can still picture her, was sort of on the periphery, and she came right and she looked right at me, and she was opening her beak trying to quack, and she couldn't, and she kept telling me she was in pain and she needed help. And sometimes animals will do that. They'll just have a sense of who's going to hear them, who's going to be open to what they're saying. I think that's why she came to me. But I was like this little 5 or 6 year old kid. I heard her and I felt her pain. We were talking about energetic protection earlier, and I didn't know about that
Yep.
then. I was this little kid. I didn't know how to process the pain of another being. All I did was melt down and start crying and said, I'm so sorry. And then I went to my parents. I said, the duck is sick. The duck is sick. She's hurting. We have to take the duck to the doctor and help the duck. And for like 10 seconds, they thought it was cute. But then when I wouldn't stop crying, because I was at this place of feeling the truth of the duck's pain, wanting to help her. And then my parents got really mad because I was crying, and they were not particularly kind people. So eventually they started slapping me and telling me to shut up and dragged me away, blah, blah, blah. So not that I was conscious of it at the time, but I know unconsciously that day I made this decision. It's not safe to tell people that I hear the animals.
That's interesting.
So I continued to hear them, but I thought something was wrong with me that I did. I thought there was something weird about me. And then as I became an adult, and clear memories of abuse in my childhood came up, then I thought, oh, well, I love the animals very profoundly, and I can hear them, because I was abused, and I trust animals more than people. Well, there's some truth in that, but what happened for me later, I don't want to say later in life because it was like a long time ago. When I was 35, I went on a vacation to Cape Cod with a friend, and we were just kind of going on a girls' little long weekend vacation. And part of the package we bought included a whale watch trip. I didn't know anything about whales. I didn't know a sperm whale from a gray whale from a humpback. I knew nothing. I mean, I loved all animals, but I didn't know anything about whales. Well, we went on this trip, and as the naturalist in the boat was giving this talk on our way out to a place called Stellwagen Bank, where humpback whales feed in that area, I was getting very, very touched and deeply moved by learning the history of whaling. And something just, because I didn't know anything about it before. And then about an hour into this half-day experience, a humpback came to the side of the boat and stayed for an hour. And just logged and rolled and spy hopped. And of course, as many people are when they see humpback whales, I was enchanted and thrilled by his appearance and his grace. But there was something so much deeper. I started sobbing, and I kept having this thought, you're in the presence of family. You're in the presence of family. And as soon as I acknowledged that, instead of being confused by that thought, the whale started talking to me. And that in itself is another, whole long story.
My skin, I've got goosebumps. Because I know, like, we went to Alaska, and to see one of those creatures is just, it's beyond words. They're just so amazing. And to have one stay at your boat for an hour, that's like unheard of.
It was really amazing. And, all of us with whatever species it may be, I think, we all have those life-changing moments with animals. It doesn't have to be a whale. It a spider, it can be our kitten or our horse.
Oh,
It doesn't matter. But for me, even though I already deeply, deeply loved all animals, that whale, because of our conversation and seeing him, really changed my life. And that, um, I was still doing corporate work and human resources, and I didn't want to do it anymore after
yeah,
that. And I can't tell you, oh, it was this big overnight change. It took a few years,
right.
but I just knew, even though I loved that work and I was doing well in that work at that time, but it had no color for me anymore. It had no satisfaction. And I had to admit, and also in the midst of that time frame, I met my mentor in animal communication, who's Dr. Jerry Ryan. And Jerry is both a psychotherapist and an animal communicator. And because my background and training is in therapy, I trusted her. You know, we really hit it off. And she kept saying to me, Teresa, you're good, because I took all her workshops, and she said, you're natural at this. You have to do it as a practice. And so that's kind of my story. You know, what
I
happened
love
was,
it.
you know, for a while there was this conflict, like, oh my God, I'm this corporate person. I can't like become a psychic. What, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then, yeah, I'm making fun of myself saying that. And then, you know, the time just came where I knew I kept on doing some of that work as a consultant for corporations for about 5 years, so I could start building my practice.
Mhm.
It wasn't like some overnight change in terms of what I do every day, but it was an overnight change after I saw that whale. I just could no longer deny that I hear animals and that that's what I wanted to do. So,
So everything that happened to you in your entire life led to you eventually making the transition from the corporate world into running your own business
right,
and living your passion, right?
absolutely. And
Oh,
another little piece of that um, is sort of parallel. There's some overlap, and that is before I even left RCA, where I worked for 10 years. Um, During that period, I lost my first cat as an adult. And that's another whole story too, but it really changed my life. I mean, even though I had this background in counseling and therapy, there wasn't anything about pet loss in 1985. There weren't books and support groups, and there was nothing. And I scoured the literature for help, because when he died, I I lost it. I mean, I just was desolate, and went to one therapist who like totally didn't get it. And as we were talking about earlier, that sometimes when you go to a practitioner who tells you things you know are off the wall,
yeah.
it's good to just get up and leave, which I
Mhm.
did. Finally found somebody who was very good. She loved animals, and she really helped me get through it. But um, you know, my first priority for a whole year was to be with my own loss and my own grief and healing. And when I came to that place of having moved through the pain, coping with all of that, and finding meaning again, um, I wanted to help other people. I wanted to, as you and I talked about a lot, it's what you're doing now. I wanted to help other people, especially because that was so long ago. There wasn't a lot of help out there.
That's it.
It
Yeah.
was disenfranchised loss. I mean, it still
Right.
is today, but
Yes.
30 some years ago, it was much
It
worse.
works. Right.
So
Right.
in 1986, I started doing pet loss grief counseling part-time in addition to my corporate work. So that really preceded professionally my animal communication work. So today they kind of blend together. And when I work with clients, I offer whatever it is that they are wanting, whether it's one of those services or both. So
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I know there's a lot of questions, Teresa, about what exactly animal communication is. And
okay.
you've generously provided some slides for us to follow. So let me share the screen here and we will start at page number 1. And Teresa, why don't you just tell me when to change the page and I will change it.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to say to everybody, I put these slides together for you so that you would have information beyond what we talk about today. So you don't feel like you have to memorize it all. So at least half of the slides we probably won't cover today. I won't talk about specifically unless you ask questions about them at some point, but I wanted you to have this. But just to begin, this beautiful picture you see of this woman with the dogs, that's a very dear friend of mine, Debbie Mag, who is from Cape Cod. And the picture is very old and she kindly allowed me to use it. And the quote on there, I think is so apropos to animal communication, that there are days when I hear your voice, but today I hear your soul. And that's what animal communication is. It's not about the physical body, although those are really important things you have to learn about their physical bodies, of course. But animal communication is about intuition. And I always like to tell people when I teach classes on this is that intuition is the voice of the soul. It's the voice of the soul. So that's what we're going to talk about. And on page number 3 in the slides, there's some information there on how I see animal communication. And it can be very mystical, but it's not mysterious. It can seem that way to people first learning it, but animal communication is the most natural thing in the world. It's an extension of our intuition. And when we are open and willing to listen with a genuine depth of empathy, respect, and love, and when we're willing to think of animals as soul peers, not being superior to them or inferior to them, that's when we can really hear accurately. And we'll talk about that more later. So if you could go to slide number 5 now. This is really important. And that is, well, why even use animal communication? What's the benefit, whether it's during illness or end of life, which we'll definitely be talking about today, or any circumstances? Well, because it takes the guesswork out. It takes the guesswork out of learning what our animals are feeling physically or emotionally. It helps us learn what they want. It helps us learn their perspective about their life and their concerns instead of guessing. So that's really the number one benefit of doing it. So if we move on to page number 6, and a lot of this is on my website in a little less detail, but I think it's really important, instead of just saying, well, here's how you use animal communication, it's important to have a context of how it fits in with the other things we do with and for animals. And I like to think of this as the 3 windows of understanding animals, windows through which we can enhance our understanding, support, and care for them. And those 3 windows are health and physiology, behavior, viewing behavior, and from the heart and soul. And if it's possible to scroll that up a little bit, what's important to know when we think of those 3 equally important windows, they're all significant because they each in their own way help us understand our animals and keep them healthy. Problems can arise, in my opinion, when we only acknowledge or believe in one of them or 2 of them and reject one of the other windows. And this might sound silly, but as you might imagine, there are certainly some scientists who totally reject telepathy, totally reject that we can gather information about and from our animals through animal communication. And so they'll just reject that. And that's really sad because we miss a lot of information when we only look at what's physically observable and the physiology of a body. Now, it can go the other way too. I have some clients who are so enamored with animal communication and what it can do for us that they'll call me and they'll say, I have this new puppy. Can you please train him about how to do his business outside? Well, or they'll say, I have a horse who does such and such. Please make them do it differently. Or worse, I'll have a client who might say, my animal's sick. And please tell them I want them to do this or to do that or make them well or whatever. when somebody calls me and they, or even emails me for an appointment and they say my animal's really, really ill, and I can tell from what they're describing, this is a serious situation. Before I do a session, I always say to them, you've got to take your animal to the vet. Animal communication is never, ever, ever, ever a substitute for veterinary care of any kind. It's not a substitute for training. It's not a substitute for behavioral work. They all work together. So when you look at the bottom of that page, what I believe is that when we have a prejudice that only one or two of those windows to understanding our animals is legitimate and we reject the other views, that's when we don't see the whole picture. That's when we don't see the whole picture. And if you go on to the next slide, Kenda, this is just described a little bit more in pictures. There are those three windows again: health, physiology, observed behavior, and the heart and soul of the animal. They are all critical to our relationships with our animals. It's the heart and soul, and I like to call this, it's through love, the portal of the heart, that we come together as souls. And it's only through that portal that we can really communicate with each other at the soul level. And this is not to discount the absolute vital need for veterinary care and behavioral observation and training, but it's through that third window, the heart and the soul, that's where animal communication occurs. That's where it occurs. So another way of saying that on the next slide, which is page 8, I call beyond biology and behavior. Again, not in any way discounting them, but again, through the third window of the heart and soul, also what I call the path of empathy, compassion, and love. It's through that window that we employ the natural skill of telepathy. It's through this window that we can get information beyond that physical. And I love this quote. If you can scroll that up just a little bit, it's a beautiful quote from Charles Littleleaf, where he says, animals are not just living things. They're beings with lives, with unique individuals, with personality traits, emotional profiles, and a library of experience, a library of knowledge built on experience. And we're not just witnessing biology, but a biography. To me, that is one of the most truthful, moving quotes and descriptions of who animals are. And when we can believe that, that's when animal communication can help us just access what's already there. So one more way of looking at this on the next page is page 9. This is something I put together a long time ago for some animal communication workshops. And if you look at, this is, if it's not obvious to you, it's an illustration of an iceberg. And of course, with icebergs, we know we only see the tip of the iceberg above the waterline. Animal communication takes us below the waterline. Not only do icebergs show us just the tip of them, we know, of course, there's so much more underwater. When you see the pictures of the humpback whales in there, not only did I see that first whale in 1988, I've been visiting whales and swimming with whales ever since then, and I am very, very close to humpback whales, so I'm really used to their behavior in the water. And one of the tidbits about whales that I learned a while ago from scientists is that when you're in a whale watch boat, or when you're at the shore watching whales who are close by, typically at any given time, we only see about 10% of the whale's body.
Really?
As excited, I'll take any percent. I mean, just to see them just seeing their breath gets me excited.
Yeah.
But that's a scientific fact that when we're above the waterline on the land or in a boat, we only see about, if you look at that first picture, you see the whale's fluke or tail above the waterline, the rest of the whale's underneath.
Yep.
Well, never was that more clear to me than after I took my first whale swimming trip in 1999. And I was absolutely thrilled to get to snorkel and be in the water with humpbacks. And even though when you're snorkeling, you aren't literally underwater, for those of you who snorkel know, because of the mask, you kind of feel like you're about 10 feet under the water from what you can see. And by that time, I had probably read 100 books on whales, gone to at least 150 land-based, or I'm sorry, whale watch boat-based trips to see whales. I knew everything about them that I could possibly know as a layperson. But when I saw them underwater for the first time, I saw the whole whale, not just the peck coming up out of the water, or the spy hopping head or the fluke. I saw the whole whale, and this is important, in their home. In their home. It was so clear we were guests in their home. Now, I'm saying this not to go on about whales, but just to make a point that telepathic animal communication is similar to that. If you look at this slide again, when we do behavioral work with animals, whether it's us, on our own, observing our animals so that we can track what's going on, health issues, and the obvious emotional distress to joy that we see in our animals, those are all things, if you look at the right-hand part of that slide, those are physically visible. They're observable, they're measurable. But what's below that waterline is not physically visible, but it's discernible to the heart and soul. And of course, when I was with the whales in the water, that was visible. But when we're making the distinction here about the observation health issues of animals versus communicating with them telepathically, when we do that, we're going below the waterline.
Nice.
Because we're seeing the whole picture when we do that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that in one conversation with one animal, we know every single thing we're ever going to need to know about them. But in that conversation about the issue we're talking about, we're going to get the whole picture, not just the physically verifiable picture. And right on cue, one of my cats is...
I can hear Kitty.
Sorry about that. Okay, well, if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to just go through a few things to describe, well, what animal communication is now that we've done some context. So in this first picture, and this is by a very talented artist named Daniel Holman, who's very kindly given me permission to use this in my teaching. And what I love about this is it shows when you see the wolf and the person, they aren't looking at each other. That person could be 3,000 miles away. That's how telepathy works. It's the transmission of feelings, thoughts, or images over distance. It's a universal language that we all know. We're all telepathic. Some of us have just forgotten it because we've been influenced by a culture that tends to trust scientific information much more than telepathic or intuitive information. And that third line is really important. Telepathy is the natural extension of intuition and empathy, which we all have inside of us. It involves receiving and sending words, images, and feelings back and forth. But I'm going to ask you all to answer a question within yourself right now. And that is to remember a time, or many times, when you just had a gut feeling about something. Maybe it was as simple as you're in the grocery store and you get this strong feeling, no, I'm not supposed to get these oranges. They aren't good for me this week. I'm supposed to get this. Or you're driving down the road and you get this strong feeling that I'm not supposed to take the exit I normally do. I'm supposed to take this other exit. And then hours later, you find out there might have been an accident on the exit you had planned to take. Those moments when we have those gut feelings that feel like truth to us, even though they are not physically verifiable. That's just one way to describe, another way to describe what animal communication is. And on the next slide, which is page 11, we talk a little bit here about what telepathic animal communication is not about. And as I said a little earlier, it's never, ever, ever an alternative to veterinary care. It's never an alternative to basic dog training or horse training. However, and I work with a lot of clients about this, it can help augment dog or horse training. It can help augment that. It can help a dog learn why they're being asked to potty outside and not in the house. For a horse to understand what the danger is when they buck or they rear. Those are just, real quick samples that I thought of. So it's definitely not ever meant to be in place of good and important training or behavioral work, but it can supplement it to help the animal understand not just will I get a treat when I sit, but why the person wants them to sit at the intersection in the city so they don't run out and get killed. It's also very important to remember, looking back at this list, animal communication is not about reading physical behavior or body language. It has nothing to do with the body. That's why it can be done by phone. Again, that doesn't mean the physical body behavior is unimportant, but that's a different kind of professional work. Telepathic work is connecting with the spirit or soul of the animal. Ethically, animal communication should never be used to try to control, coerce, or demand behavior. It can help shape behavior for ethical good reasons when it's done collaboratively with the animal, but it's not about control or coercion. Every once in a while, mostly in the distant past, I'd have people call me for consults, and they pretty much were asking me to demand that their animal behave a certain way. And I got kind of tired of spending a long time trying to convince people why that doesn't work, that animal communication can't do that. So I wrote up a bunch of articles about how, so if you're interested in using animal communication for behavioral work on my blog, I have 2 really long articles about that to help you understand how they can work really well together. Animal communication is also not about species, breed, gender, or archetype generalizations we'll talk about a little more. And it is most definitely not about parlor tricks. Animal communication is not entertainment, and it's not about serving the ego needs of humans. It's a soulful thing used to help us connect in spirit and in heart with animals. So, if you take a look at page number 12, I'm hoping this part's obvious by now, but let's take a quick look at it. What animal communication is, again, what it can provide is a tool to open communication with our animals, to listen, to better understand their thoughts, their feelings, their motivations, their concerns, their perceptions, and their stories. I work with a lot of folks, which makes me happy, who have adopted rescue animals. And many times, either the person or the animal will want to talk about the animal's life before they were adopted. And sometimes knowing these stories opens up a whole new world of understanding of who they are. So it's also a tool to ask for information, to provide information, sometimes to request change, because there are behavioral problems we have with our animals, to solve problems, to negotiate, mediate, and sometimes just to understand the longings that they may have in their heart or soul. Animal communication is unself-conscious. It's spirit-to-spirit communication. It's about sharing thoughts, feelings, stories, pictures, and energy. And it, when done ethically, is a humble communication between 2 beings who are equals. And if you take a look at that beautiful dog at the bottom, that's a picture of one of my friend's dogs who's now on the other side. And this, I think, to me, is one good reason to use animal communication. And this is this idea from this wonderful quote from Charles Martin that all souls have but one request, one simple, unspoken, undeniable need, and that's to be known. All of us want to be known. And animal communication is one way to help our animals know we are attempting to know them. So I'm going to just quickly go over the next couple pages, and then maybe we can open it to questions or move on to how this overlays with pet loss and grief. A little bit ago, I talked about archetypes and stereotypes. This is another important way to understand what animal communication is and isn't. It's not an archetype. Archetypes provide general information about animals, which create very limiting stereotypes based on the assumptions and opinions of humans, and they assign assumptions to an entire species. And I have great respect for the people who've written books and put together cards with messages from animals from particular species. I know that that's done from love and for respect for animals, but it's not animal communication. And so, for instance, if you pick up a card in one of these archetypal card decks, and you choose the card for rabbit, it will say inevitably, this rabbit stands for fear. And if you pick this card, it means you have some fear in your life to overcome. Well, I'm not in any way mocking divination cards. They can be enormously helpful, but it's not animal communication.
Right.
It's not animal communication. And it's funny because many years ago, right after I bought one of those very decks, and I read through all of them, I was taking a walk at my favorite place to hike. It's Point Lobo State Park near where I live. Though right now, because of COVID, I'm not right there, but it's one of my very favorite places to be and to be with wildlife. And right after I was reading these cards, I'm taking my hike, and this little rabbit came up right to the edge of the path, and he was so cute. And I started talking with him and asking him how he was, and he wasn't terribly interested in talking. He said, "Well, I'm just fine. Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm a human who loves to come to this home where you live and see the beauty here and see animals like you." And he said, "Well, that's nice. That's very interesting, but I'm busy." And he hopped away. So that was one, and that happens. Every conversation with an animal is not some big soul-changing thing like the story I told you about with the whale. But the reason I bring that up is if you pick up some divination deck, which are archetypes of animals, and a real common one is whales are the messages and the keepers of all the Akashic records on the earth. I don't believe that for a moment. Every whale on the earth, every individual of every species on the earth is exactly that, an individual. And they have their individual soul purposes, their individual lives. And are some animals here on earth to be incredible spiritual teachers? Absolutely. And some are just here like the little bunny who's living his little bunny life and certainly wasn't interested in teaching me about fear. He was just having his little breakfast or whatever meal he was eating. So that's important to remember. And I don't mean to mock archetypal things, definitely don't want to mock divination cards, but it's important to know that is not animal communication. Archetypes are static. Animal communication is dynamic. When we communicate with animals telepathically, we're having a conversation with them, not reading a book with somebody's opinion about them. In animal communication, we're hearing their thoughts, their feelings, their stories of individuals, and every animal is, of course, an individual. Telepathy is also not based on physical status. When it comes to telepathy, when it comes to speaking at the soul level, we're all equal. We're all peers. So species, breed, gender, that information should not ever be a filter through which we connect with an animal if we want accurate and unbiased information. And I'm just making this up, but let's just say I have a friend who is Jack Russell's, and I find them to be this nervous, jumping all around dogs. Or I have a friend with German Shepherds who I find to be incredibly intelligent and smart. That's some of that really important breed information, behavioral observation, understanding of breeds. That's really important information. However, when we're talking telepathically with an animal, that needs to all go away. We need to talk to them with a blank slate and find out what they want, what they want, what their thoughts are, not what we expect of them because of their breed or because of their gender. When we do that, we're filtering. So to receive accurate information, when we do talk with an animal, we've got to let go of any preconceived ideas, stereotypes, or even our desires. And to start walking in just a little bit to the overlay of how animal communication can help us with anticipatory grief, hospice periods, and when our animals have died. This can be very difficult, especially during anticipatory grief and hospice periods, because we want them to live. We want them to live as long as possible. Or after they've died and we talk to them, maybe we have this burning desire that they come back to us. And it's totally okay to have those feelings. And we've got to be honest and genuine about those feelings. But it's important that we own them as ours. And when we talk to our animal, to be willing to listen to their thoughts, their feelings, their desires, separate from ours, to listen with empathy and love. And of course, one of the toughest times to do this is when our animals are seriously ill and we're talking about what they want. Those very difficult questions like, are you ready to leave? Or do you want more of the cancer treatments, or are you ready just to be in palliative care? Those are very tough questions, but can bring us such incredible information to help our animals, which is what, of course, we all want to do. If you take a look just quickly, I want to mention on pages 14 and 15, there's something, I'm not going to talk about this really, but if you want to read more, it is really important, I think, to know the difference between a psychic reading and a telepathic animal conversation. They're two extremely different things. The only thing they have in common is the ability to access intuitively derived information. What traditionally a psychic will do, typically, because we're all different, of course, in how we practice, is typically very different from what a telepathic animal communicator will do. I want to just say one more little thing about that, the word psychic means of the soul. That's the definition of psychic, of the soul. Sadly, in my opinion, media from movies to television shows, whatever, have really distorted what psychic means. Even people who are very genuine psychics have these TV shows like I See Dead People. I mean, my skin would crawl when I'd watch these TV shows with some psychic walking down the street, literally going up to some stranger and saying, hello, I'm psychic so-and-so, and I can see your dead uncle. I mean, can you imagine what it would do to somebody to be accosted on the street with that kind of information? Now, I'm not saying all psychics do that, but this is professional work, and it's really important to hold professional boundaries in how we do it. So when we do access information, it's really important that what we do with it. Mm-hmm. So if you could just put up one more slide,
sure.
16.
16.
This shows lots of different species. And going back to this issue of how we can filter what we hear if we have preconceived ideas about a species or an individual. Maybe we have 3 dogs and one of them is clearly the more intelligent one, and another one is the cuddly one, another one is the, well, maybe not so bright one. And that's okay, just like the people, we're all different. But when we talk to them, it's important that those observations we have about them and their abilities are not part of the conversation. When we go in to talk to animals, to truly hear them fully and accurately, we've got to begin with the assumption that every living being is sacred, that we are all peers at the soul level, and that there's no hierarchy of form. Because when we do believe that, what we hear is going to be filtered by that. So Um, I could go on and talk. I just want to note to everybody on pages 18 through 22, there are some handouts I prepared just to give you a sense of how animal communication might help you in those situations of illness, of hospice with grief and after death. Just some ideas to make you think. That picture, by the way, on page 19, and then I promise I'll stop. um, this is from the same friend of mine who allowed me to use that picture on the first page. And this was a way she honored her dogs, Sydney and Charlie, two gorgeous black labs who died within a year or two of each other. And when we talked with them, and she wanted to know, what do you want me to do with your ashes? Do you want me to keep them here in my home forever to touch and hold? Do you want me to bury them? Do you want me to sprinkle them in the park? What do you want? And the dogs said to her, we want you to take our ashes and release them on the beach where you took us to walk. So she got this idea that she wouldn't just release them on the beach. She made this heart, and there, as all of us as her friends watch, sobbing, of course, and bringing.
Oh God, you got me crying just thinking about it.
Talked to them a little bit that day, and
Beautiful.
a bit, and this was fairly close to the water line, so we stayed at my friend's request until the water came.
Washed.
Washes out.
Oh.
Now, but the point about this beautiful ritual and animal communication is the dogs told her this is what they wanted. So that's what she did. So that's just one little example of things, ways it can help us know what our animals want. So
I'm learning so much, Teresa. We've got some questions.
Okay.
I'd love to like steal you just for myself, but I want to get to our questions here. So okay, so we had Sherry. Sherry wrote in and she wanted to talk a little bit or understand the Rainbow Bridge. She's willing to see things differently, so obviously that's not her the way she sees the world. So is the Rainbow Bridge real, or how do you describe that to people?
Well, I think, Sherry, and everybody who's listening to this, that the most important thing about our spiritual beliefs regarding death and the other side, whether you call the other side heaven or whatever you might call it. I like to say the other side, not because I think that's the only way to describe it, but it's sort of non-specific about a particular religious or spiritual belief. As a practitioner, it's extremely important to me to support others' beliefs and help them clarify them. And I think, Sherry, that's what you're asking is, well, hey, is this Rainbow Bridge thing real? What's your experience? Two things I would say that I think are important to that question. The most important one is that we ask ourselves, what spiritual or religious beliefs do I have about death and what happens after death for animals? What beliefs do I have now that are either serving me, helping and supporting me through this process, or in any way hindering or confusing me? And I ask my clients that question a lot. It's really, really important. My role as an animal communicator is never to tell somebody what they should believe or what some universal truth is. Now, the other thing I would say in response to that is, because I don't want to just say, hey, figure it out yourself.
Right.
I will say this, that having talked to many thousands of animals who have died, each experience is unique. Each experience is unique. Now, I've talked to probably 20,000 animals on the other side over the last 30 plus years. I will say there are trends of things that I hear and that they show me, even though it's all an individual experience. But to get to your specific question about the Rainbow Bridge, I've never had an animal say, hey, I'm at the Rainbow Bridge specifically. And I think that's a human-made term that we've given to an experience.
I like that.
Experience on the other side.
Yeah.
There are some animals who've shown me something. I've never seen a bridge per se, but many animals show me what's described in the Rainbow Bridge, that they're in this sunny park, beautiful place, hanging out with other animals. Very often they will show me that there are people there, souls that they either knew on the other side, and sometimes they show me there are souls that were recently human whose animals are still on Earth and they miss their animals, so they hang out together. And there are some animals, and this is one of the tenets of the Rainbow Bridge, as I've read it, which is, hey, when animals die, they go to this place called the Rainbow Bridge, and they stay there until their person or persons die, and then they move on to heaven or the other side, whatever we call it. I have never heard an animal describe like a temporary place that they sort of have to stay in until their human comes. However, I have heard many animals say, I'm happy and I'm content here, I'm well. They all talk about being well. And I don't want to come back necessarily. I'm going to stay here until you come, and I'm going to meet you when you come. So the one thing I hear a lot that overlays with the Rainbow Bridge is it, and what I've been told by so many animals, is when there has been great love on the earth, when there has been profound love back and forth between an animal and a person, there's no question that there's a reunion. There's always reunion from what they tell me. I don't want to ever say, you know, I'm Moses and I know all the facts. But in the trends of what I've heard over time, I've come to believe there's always reunion. I don't know whether that helps, Sherry.
Yeah, I love that. And Sherry, if you're on here, let me know if you have any other questions. Cindy's asking, this is an earlier one. Do you communicate with deceased animals? Because she's hearing about animals that are here or now or sick. So can you teach, or I don't know if you can teach people how to do this, right, Teresa? Like you have a class in this?
There are many other good teachers too.
Yeah. Okay. So can you teach people to communicate with their deceased pet? Because I think that would be something that would be people in this group in particular would be really interested in.
Absolutely. Most fundamentally, I'd like to respond to that first by saying, when we think of animal communication, telepathic communication between a person and an animal, and it happens between animals and people too. But we have this verbal and written language, so we don't do it too often telepathically. But anyway, when we think of it between a person and an animal, sometimes people will ask me, well, is it different talking to an animal on the other side? Like a lot of people will call themselves mediums. And there's all sorts of them. When I teach animal communication, I go through all the terms that many people use about psychic roles. And that can be important to distinguish. But I never call myself a medium. To me, in my experience, there's no difference between speaking with an animal who's here and speaking with an animal who's left their body. Because when we connect with the soul, it doesn't matter whether that soul is inside a body at that moment or outside of the body. Doesn't matter what species, it really doesn't matter because of the connections with the soul. Right. So if somebody, and I'm not sure about the context for this person, but if that person already knows how to communicate with an animal who's here, it's the same when they leave. Now, to go to the question of teaching, because of lots of other projects I'm involved in right now, I'm not doing any live teaching on basic and advanced animal communication. I can refer people to lots of good people who do that. I may be doing it again in about 1.5 to 2 years, but I just don't have time right now. I do have two things that might be of interest to the person who asked this. I have an introductory class on understanding telepathic animal communication on my website. I also put together to help people with this just universal desire that we all have to feel connected to our animals after they die. So a number of years ago, I put together a CD that's now available as an MP3 called Connecting with Your Animal's Soul After Death. And the first part of it, which I think is about an hour or so, talks about how that works and how you can do it. And then the second part is a guided meditation, literally preparing you to move into that conversation.
Oh, let's put those links down below, Teresa, after we're finished so people can access them. I think that's
in there on the let me just check what page it might be.
In the attachments. I'm just checking.
And under the section called resources, there's something called a library of pet loss grief support resources. Okay. In there, you'll see on page 24.
Okay, good.
It's called Connecting with Your Animal After Death.
Oh, so I love that. And guys, Teresa has graciously agreed for me to share that the slides that we were going through with all of you. So I will put them down below as a PDF so you guys can access them at any time. I have one last question for you, Teresa. And if you guys have any more questions, feel free to pop them on while Teresa's answering this question for me. So let's say you're at that decision where you have to decide when you're going to be taking your animal to the vet, or if it's time for them to enter into hospice. You're beside yourself with grief. Are you still able to decipher what your pet wants when your heart is like breaking in half and you've got that anticipatory grief? Like, are you still able to have that communication?
The first answer is yes, it's possible. But to elaborate on that, I would say one of the most powerful, helpful, and sacred things we can do when our animals are ill, and of course, death comes in lots of different ways. Sometimes it's sudden, sometimes it's a tragic accident or a tragic illness. But when we have a period of time, whether it's a few days or a few months, to be with our animals before they're dying, one of the greatest gifts we can give them, us, in the relationship is to practice stillness, to cultivate some sort of, however simple, some sort of meditation or stillness practice. Because when we find those moments of stillness is when grace can come in. And that will never, ever erase our pain, but it helps us be present with the pain in a way that we're then able to communicate.
And you know what? You just took me back to my palliative care training. And they say, you know, when you're at bedside and somebody's dying, everybody's so uncomfortable and they don't know what to do. And I remember in one of my books, it was be quiet, close your mind off, be present, match their breathing. You know, we could do that with our pet too, right? As our pet is breathing, we can match their breathing and just be in sync with them and just be in the moment, right, Teresa? That moment.
And you know, New Age literature is filled with be in the moment, blah, 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 blah. And some of it frankly gets on my nerves because it doesn't always also acknowledge feelings like fear and grief and upsetness and anguish. Those feelings are real. I don't care how much you meditate, those feelings aren't going to just disappear from your life. So what I'm talking about, I just want to be sure I was clear about this, was not that, oh, find some moments of stillness and it'll all be real easy and you'll chat with your animal and you'll never cry again. No. They're moments. And maybe they're many minutes, but they're moments in time where we acknowledge our anguish, we acknowledge our fear, and take some breaths and say, yeah, those are real. And I'm going to take a little bit of time. I'm going to see those feelings over here and honor them. And whatever your spiritual beliefs are, by the way, whoever you might pray to, whether whoever that might be, you might want to ask those beings to hold those feelings for you for a little while, to hold and take care of your fear and your anguish and your emotional pain. And just, it's like making a conscious decision. Those are very real. I'm going to put them over here for now. And now I'm going to step into stillness. And I'm going to be present with my animal. And if it's 1 minute, that 1 minute of that stillness that brings in grace can change the intensity of that fear and anguish and whatever those feelings are over there. It's not going to make them disappear ever.
Oh God, no.
It helps soften the edges. Now, one other thing I want to say that I think is related to that question, which is so important to me, I can't tell you how many times I have these precious, loving clients who just love their animals so much, and the animal's in the hospice period, or at least, nearing the hospice time. And they'll say to me, well, I just want to tell you, I'm crying all the time, but I always go in another room when I cry because I don't want to upset my animal. And I don't want my upsetness to affect them. Well, that's a very selfless, wonderful, wonderful stance to have, that, of course, I don't want my animal to get filled with my upsetness.
The emotions, yeah.
Right. However, what's tricky about this, but it's pretty easy to work with, is our animals know we're upset whether we're crying in the other room or right next to them. So expressing our great sadness of the anticipatory grief, even if it's at the moment of euthanasia or at the moment without euthanasia that they're taking their last breath, our emotional overwhelm doesn't have to adversely affect the animal, as long as we have what I'm going to describe as an attitude of something. And it can be especially helpful if we just say it out loud to our animals or telepathically. And that is, I remember the first time I did this was with my cat, Katie. And it was the day of her euthanasia. And I was just beside myself.
Oh, yeah.
And she was dying of kidney disease and very frail, but she was all curled up in one of those little tiny beds. I remember touching her. I was already doing grief counseling, and I looked at her and I said, you know what? I help all these other people, but right now, I don't know anything about all of that right now. All I know is I love you. I love you. And I'm devastated at the thought of knowing I'm going to lose your physical presence in my life soon. But I also want you to know that I have what I need within me and with good people around me to get through my grief and my pain. It's not your job to help me through that, especially not today. My job is just to be with you. So when you see me cry and you see or feel my pain, no, it's mine. It's not yours, it's mine. My job right now is to surround you with my love and to make this the best possible experience for you. So that was done the day of euthanasia, but that can be done 100 times during a long illness or hospice period. So the idea is to never deny our own feelings.
Right.
But to just make it clear to our animal that there's this boundary between our anguish and the animal.
Be real, right, Teresa? Be real. Like those feelings be real.
Exactly. And it can be especially important to do with animals who've had a lifetime of taking care of us, which we know many animals lovingly do. And so these clients who come to me and they say, my God, well, I don't want them to take on my pain. That's an incredibly selfless, wonderful thing to worry about. But there's a way to deal with that where we don't have to in any way deny our feelings. Excuse me. My cat's getting very
Oh,
antsy.
he's telling us it's time. He's watching the clock and telling us it's time. I have one more comment I'm going to read out to you. This is from Marion, and she says, my fur baby has been gone 18 days, not very long. And I hear her often say, Mommy, please don't cry. They do know that we grieve.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
I love that.
I'm wondering, does Miriam have a question on that, or does she just want to share that?
I think right there she was just making a comment for us.
Okay.
Now, I don't want to keep you, Teresa. I said we'd be an hour, and we're a little over an hour, and I like to respect people's time. Afterwards, we're finished here. I'm going to gather all the links about things that you talked about. We'll include them in the comments section below, as well as the PDF. And if people have any questions, I'll just kind of take a look at them, and I'll send you questions. So, because I know a lot of people might be at work
back to your page and respond.
Yeah, you're a member. So yeah, if you don't mind, when you have some free time, just check in and answer some questions. And if anybody wants to reach out to you directly, we'll have the availability for them to reach out to you directly too. I want to thank you so much for coming here and graciously donating your time and energy to all of us. And I learned a lot, and I want to learn more. So I see me having you back on here again as
just go back
to make some more appearances.
I want to thank Miriam was the last comment.
Marion was, yes.
Marion, I really want to acknowledge how wonderful it is that she heard her animal coming in and talking to her.
She's got that connection happening already, right?
Yeah.
She's got the magic, and that's what other people are striving to get. And with your PDF, they'll be able to read about that and contact you and get more information if they want to take a deeper dive.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Teresa, thank you.
I just want to wish everybody who's here, whatever place you might be in with the loss of a beloved animal, whether it was a year ago or 2 days ago, or it's happening in the near future, I want to wish all of you every blessing of love and grace and every form of support you need to come through this experience with peace. May you all be well.
Thank you, Teresa.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.